Thank you for tuning in to the Astrological Commission Podcast. This is your host, Issachar Bey, and I'm here with a very special guest, somebody who I believe, I call her a master astrologer. And the reason I do is we will get into the conversation, and you guys will, I believe, by the time we're done, agree with me. I think that she's very fascinating. I think that what she has brought to the astrological community has been phenomenal. I have not seen anything like as she has brought it. Looking through astrology through her perception and through her lens, it's been phenomenal. It's been a great journey for me, and I'm looking forward to really sitting down and talking to who I call the master astrologer. I want you guys to welcome Miss Jenn Zahrt. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well, thank you. I'm blushing, actually. I'm not sure if you can see through the audio, but it's like, thank you so much for those kind words.
Oh, Jenn, you are, I would have to say you are a phenomenal astrologer. There's so many ways where I want to start, but where I want to start first is, how were you introduced into astrology? How did you get into, what was your introduction into astrology?
Well, I was grounded by my parents because I did something they told me not to do. And my very favorite teacher, Gary Lorenzen, noticed that I was sad. And he goes, "What time are you born, when, where? And can you go to the bookstore?" And that was literally the only place I could go. And my parents were pretty mad, so I was grounded for 6 months. They took away my AOL chat rooms. This was back last millennium. And I was really just going, how am I going to survive this groundation? What I did is a topic for a different podcast. But anyway, so they basically said, you can go to the Powell's bookshop in Portland, and that's about it. And Gary said, get the Atlas, get the Ephemeris for midnight, get this. The Koch Book of Tables was my first set of tables, actually. And I had no computer because, remember, they took away that AOL chat room access and all my computing stuff. So he taught me how to do charts by hand, and he was like, looking at my own chart once he had drawn it up, and he was just like, "Oh, in 6 months you'll be fine." And in that 6 months I became an astrologer, and I didn't even notice I was grounded.
Wow, that's unbelievable. So in your introduction into astrology, who were some of the people who you studied or who you believe were your mentors? Like, who were some of the people that really you really took a hold of their work and their books and so forth?
Yeah, that's a great question because I'm not anywhere close to where they are, except I am. So I began with Alan Oken, and then all of that popular astrology you could find in used bookshops. So I did Jeff Wolf Green, and I was looking at some of those more, classical 70s, 80s, 90s sources because I was learning in the late 90s. And Alan Oken's Complete Astrology was my very first book that I actually studied front to back and found a lot of answers in. And I kind of stayed in that eddy of humanistic astrology, I would say, until about 2010. So we're talking very, 10, 20 years almost in that zone, And it wasn't until later that I began to learn about traditional astrology. So I first thought astrology was just humanistic astrology, but I loved it to death. I was literally going to take a bullet for astrology.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I know that you are into the traditional. We will get into that. But I also know that you're into Uranian, and I'm a Uranian. So I was very fascinated to know that there are other Uranians out there like me. How did you get introduced to Uranian and the Uranian system?
So because of my lineage with German, and my ancestors are German, I found German language to be quite easy. And ironically, people always say, even Germans say German is hard. But for some reason, I found it to be something that just kind of clicked with me. And so I spent my entire time after learning about astrology, learning astrology with my German teacher. I was like, well, I'm going to learn everything there is to know about the history of German astrology because I saw that Nick Campion, whose book was the other book I didn't actually mention to answer your last question, his Great Year was the other mundane astrology book that really blew my mind. And it's actually coming out. I'm an entire secondary progressed lunation cycle later. I'm typesetting it for getting it back into print, which is blowing my own mind. So the Great Year will be back into everyone's hands pretty soon here. But when I was younger, what he did with the astrology there just blew me away. And I noticed that there wasn't anybody in the English-speaking world looking at German sources. And so from a very early age, I had this lightning bolt of like, I'll do that. And then I turned around and I was like, so where do you apply for that job? Because you can't. There's no way to be like, how am I going to be like the German version of Nick Campion? Like, you can't just like go to college for that, you know? So I ended up learning, I took all kinds of German classes in college. I went to a German literature department at UC Berkeley for graduate school and got my PhD. And the entire time I was that student in class who was raising their hand about astrology, no matter which way I could push it. And then in graduate school, they were like, you can't do astrology inside of your PhD. You can only talk about it. So I was studying the history of how Uranian, aka Hamburg School astrology came to be before I started learning how to do it. And I'm actually still, I would consider myself a baby Uranian because for so long it was taboo to actually do it, but I know a lot about its history.
That's great. And, with from the Uranian, how would you introduce into traditional, because your one of my favorite classes of yours is the triplicity rulers and how you're able to look at each third parts of a life and look at the whoever's ruling in the first 30 years and so forth.
Yeah.
And I thought that was phenomenal, but I hear other people talk about it, but from your perspective and through your lens, it's just so different and it's so dynamic to me. How was your introduction into the William Lilly, the Guido Bonattis, all of these ancient astrologers? How was your inclination into that, and that now you have taken that into really becoming, into so many other things as well as the magical astrology and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I'm up for any kind of astrology from an anthropological standpoint. I used to say, oh, that's not real astrology. And then one day Nick Campion was like, well, it exists, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, then every single astrology has kind of a reason for being. And so your question is like, well, what cultural need is this kind of astrology answering? So that's why you see so many different kinds of astrology in my personal palette. And I drove 1,000 miles. I was in the middle of my PhD thesis trying to avoid it at all costs because, it's very stressful to do those. And so if you can procrastinate, you will. So I heard that Nick and Bernadette Brady and Daryl and Gunsberg were going to be giving a 3-day workshop in San Diego. So I drove 1,000 miles from Berkeley in my little car. I told my then husband, I was like, I'm going to see you later. I got to go do this thing. There's like, it's life or death. You can't say I can't go. I got to go. So I went. And the first morning we were there, Bernadette's going through the triplicity rulers, and it just hit me kind of like a whack-a-mole on the little, arcade games, where it was just like, all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I had heard somebody explain from my natal chart why I had like these certain relationships with my family members, and I came from a blended family, and there's a sibling that isn't exactly my best friend, and I was like, oh my gosh, the relationship between this planet's aspect to that planet actually shows me pretty objectively why we don't get along. And it wasn't a psychological thing, it was a traditional thing, and it was Bonatti and actually L. Andar Zagar who spelled that out, and I'm using that very specific example, so I'm sorry, sister, if you're listening, it's you. But I'm using that example to show like how intense it was, that it was like, there's something here. And it was also a breakthrough in realizing I was already on this path of, dedicating my life to astrology. And suddenly there was this thing where it was like a whole entire world opened up. And all the things that I thought I knew about what astrology was were just blown wide open. And I had a lot more work to do. And it was so exciting. And so I just, tried to devour anything I could traditional and found a bunch of teachers and went back to school. I went to Rod Suskin's astrology program. It's a 3-year program. And people were asking me, like, you've been doing this for 19 years. Why are you doing that with him? And I'm like, because you have to have someone guide you through, any kind of lineage. If you're going to do Uranian, you need to find a Uranian person to guide you through that. You can't just get it from books, So, or do it on your own. It's really difficult to do by yourself. And so I found myself kind of back in, like, my baby astrologer days, falling in love with it all over again. And with this new kind of precision that just was so satisfying.
Yeah, that's great. How did you get into the astrological magic? How did you get into that?
I mean, I feel like all these things that you add to your toolkit just kind of almost happen to you and knock on your door. It wasn't like I was seeking it out, but I happened to be doing some alchemy in the Pacific Northwest with an alchemist named Robert Allen Bartlett. He has a school it's now called the TriStar Academy, and it's an alchemy school where you learn how to do work with animal products like eggs or shells or other kinds of things like that, which was my beginning. So I sort of started in the middle, and then I went back to the basics and started to work with plant materials like spagyrics and such. And in order to do that, they call that celestial agriculture. Alchemy is celestial agriculture. And I was already an expert in the celestial part, so I thought, let's get down to earth and figure out how this works down here. And at the same time, I was having, a lot of evenings chatting with my friend Eric Perdue, who is still translating Agrippa's books on occult philosophy. And he would say things like, this plant that's ruled by Mars isn't an analogy to Mars. It is a literal manifestation of Mars. Like, it's not Mars the planet, but it's Mars. And so you have to learn how to understand what the planet is in this totally different way, because the planet isn't just the light you see reflected from the sun on that specific rock out there. It's also in your mouth when you're experiencing hot sauce. It is your blood. It's not like your blood. So these types of things really kind of put me in touch with what was here and now and grounded my astrology in a new way. And I just kept going with it. And I was in, a bunch of communities that were exploring that as well. And so it just kind of swept me along with it. And I kept going with it.
Oh, man. I think that, your contribution has been phenomenal to me. I think that just so many different facets of what you bring to the community and I believe everybody has been affected by it. Everybody has been welcoming, and at least I believe so, because when you came into this sphere, you definitely, to me, you were able to push the needle in astrology.
Wow.
Where do you see astrology? Well, it's good right now because Uranus is at 20, 21, 22 Taurus, which is on the Aries point. But what do you see? How do you see astrology progressing and moving forward?
One step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 5 steps to the side. I mean, and I think it's always been with us and always will be with us to whatever extent. And I'm sitting in a room right now at the Celestial Arts Education Library filled with journals and newsletters by all of our astrological ancestors. And they have gone through various stages of wanting to legitimize astrology by statistics, wanting to legitimize astrology through academic publishing, wanting to not have anyone know about it unless they're called to the work, so that it's kind of one of these sacred mystery traditions. And so I think many forms of astrology will always exist. And I think from the last 100 years, the community has been continuously trying to establish some form of astrological legitimacy. And that was attempted last millennium through the establishment of Kepler College. And that had a challenge because if the whole community galvanizes around one entity and that is subjected to state approval, then those 5 people who are on the board of that state body can make or break 25 years of work. But I realized in my work, and what I want to invite the community to do is join together and still do astrological research wherever they can and publish things that could be created in an academic spirit, so that the academics who decide what is or is not academic enough have no argument, because we've gathered together as a community and we've put to print things that can be legible by academics who don't have any tradition of astrological education. Because our field is older than every other field that's currently being studied in universities right now. But we're left out,
Yeah, you're right. Now, I have Jupiter and Gemini, so I buy in the 9th house. So I buy books like Women Buy Shoes. How did you start the Celestial Art Educational Library? Because I can't wait to get there. I would probably bring a sleeping bag and you have to drag me out of there. I love to. I would love that. So how did you even start that?
That I can have bunk beds set up somewhere so that people can just stay here and how did this happen? I mean, it was in my chart for one. Let's just put it that way. So when everything came together towards the end of it, like actually becoming real, I had this moment of ecstatic, like, I don't know, I'm sure that when you read your own chart or you have it read by someone phenomenal and you just know that you're in the zone of doing what you came here to do, and there's that moment of just like bliss. I was like, I'm living my chart, and I was so excited, and it was like so amazing. But I have a lot of planets in the whole sign ninth, obviously, and German literature, foreign travel, university stuff, all that. So I've spent a lot of time in the ninth house, and I had been collecting astrology books for a while, and then I started collecting collections of astrology books, and then I volunteered on the Kepler board. My first term began in 2014 to 2016, and I was working on getting their library out of storage and back into a facility, and we did that, and so that became the Maggie A. Nalbandian Memorial Library, named after the founder of Kepler College. And then during the pandemic, Kepler went completely virtual, and my heart was still in that library, and I found out they were trying to, become so virtual, and the collection was up for, where are they going to put it? And so I said, well, I'll keep it open. I want people to still access these books. And so Kepler sold it to me, and I opened up a Celestial Arts Education Library and combined it with the 6 other massive collections of collections. So a long time ago, Michael Earlywine had his Heart Center Library in Big Rapids, Michigan, which itself was housed in this huge building, and he had a massive collection of astrology books. And a number of years ago, he donated all of the firsts in that collection, sort of the cream of the crop, to a university in Illinois. And then in 2018, he said, oh, if anybody wants to fly out, I'll donate the rest of it to you. And I'm like, I'm down. So I got on a plane, rented a U-Haul, and he's like, just pack it up and drive it back. And I said, you got it. So I spent a week there with him learning about his role in the community and what he's done, and it was super awesome to hear about his running a library and such. And it sat there latent for 4 more years before Kaylee would really take off. I call the library Kaylee, Celestial Arts Education Library. And I just thought, this material needs to be giving everyone a place to look at what they don't know, because there's so many times. I worked also for the Mountain Astrologer in the past. I've worked for many astrological publications, and then still produced books through the Sophia Center Press with Nick Campion in the University of Wales. And a lot of times people will come to us with manuscripts saying, I'm the first person to look at this factor like this. And we're scratching our heads going like, no, you're not. Go to do research, but you can't actually do it anywhere because it's not common for people to have public collections like this available, because most public libraries don't collect these things. University libraries don't collect what we have here. And I think Philip Graves, and there was a library in Chicago, Friends of Astrology Library. You've got one in Tempe, Arizona with the AFA, but there's not many places in the world where you can actually look to see, has anyone in our lineage written about this factor? And there's no database to look for it. So that's actually one thing I want to work on building. When we get enough support for Kaylee, I want to build a searchable database like JSTOR for people to be able to look up, hey, I want to read about all the articles that ever mention Chiron, for example, because there's so much more than you think. If there's 30 books about Chiron, you better believe there's 500 articles about it that probably have said what's been said, and so we need to read them and say, and now I say this, instead of re-saying the same thing over and over again,
Yeah, I mean, that's have to be phenomenal. I can't wait to get there and see that. I mean, to be in a place with all that history and all that research and to go back and to be able to look at, like you said, the astrological ancestors of all their writings and works. I would live in there. I would never leave.
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky. I get to work here every day, and every single day a new book comes out at me, and it's like, hey, Jenn, what about me? And I'm like, okay, guys, okay. Whoa, there's so much here. And even when people visit, I love seeing what they pull out of the wall, because I'm like, I had no idea we had that. That's amazing. And, it really lights them up. And, there's people researching so many strange factors that wouldn't occur to me, and I love that they get to expand their capacity here. It's really lighting up a lot of ideas for so many people.
Now, Jenn, I'm going to say this, and I'm saying this with love. I'm a big advocate and supporter, and for years loved the Mountain Astrologer. But something happened when you started to become involved in it. Like as I said before, you pushed the needle. To me, the articles were more engaging. I felt like the content was to me, it was more for me as an astrologer, a lover of astrologer. I felt like the articles were more connected to me. I was more connected to the topics. I also noticed a lot between you and Frank Clifford, and I just noticed a change. Not saying that before you it wasn't great. Before you came into it, it wasn't what it was. The Mountain Astrologer will always be what it was. It is that foundation. It is that upon which we, as astrologers, we loved. We all look forward every issue to the Mountain Astrologer, the articles. But how did you get connected with the Mountain Astrologer? And explain to us how you were able to kind of shift the content and push the needle along, so to speak, I believe.
Well, that's not entirely my doing because it was a team effort. And what happened was Tem was planning on selling the magazine to someone who had been involved in the office work and was passionate about the magazine wholeheartedly, and that person is Ray Sapp. And Ray was, learning everything that she could from Tem about publishing and publishing astrology magazines specifically. And unfortunately, Tem left way too soon. He unfortunately died of throat cancer, I think, well before his time. And so there was a lot left to be said. And Ray was building a team to help carry the magazine on and carry Tem's vision on. But what he said to her before he left the planet was, make it yours. And she really took that to heart and built a team of people that she thought would be able to express the contemporary moment in astrology in the same exact humor and spirit that Tem had when he started it as a photocopied, it wasn't even called photocopy back then, but back in 1987, black and white newsletter sort of paper where he wrote all the articles and he made doodles and comics and such, and it grew and grew and grew. But when Ray took it over, she ended up saying, I'm taking his words to heart. And she actually got a lot of community pressure that wasn't very nice to experience because people didn't like change and they didn't like the way that she was making it hers, and they didn't understand that Tem had given her his blessing. And I know that she's said it before, and I think maybe they need to hear it from someone else, but a lot of people were really upset by the changes because they didn't understand that Tem was behind them himself. He wanted Ray to turn it into her own magazine and express what she had to express. And so I contributed my voice to it at that point and not before because I didn't get to join it until after Ray had taken it on. And actually I'm not involved in the moment anymore because when Saturn entered Pisces, I got COVID for the first time in terms of the whole pandemic, no COVID, suddenly it hits me. And I realized that I had to put my energy into making sure that the Celestial Arts Education Library is strong. So I stepped back from my role at TMA and ended up putting all of my effort into the library at that point. So that was about just over a year ago.
Yeah, I totally understand. But yeah, I know just with your contribution as well as all the others, Frank and everybody else who's been very, connected to it, you can just see the shift. And I love the shift. I love the change. So, I was a little surprised too, maybe about the criticisms or whatever, how everybody felt. But I feel like as astrologers, we have to be adaptable to change. We want to push the needle away. We want to keep astrology strong and going. So, change is inevitable, so it's something that we all have to embrace. And I think that she did a phenomenal job. So, if she is listening, I want you to know you have some fans and some people behind you that saying, hey, let's keep it going. You're doing a great job. And just to keep it going and, it's definitely, if you are an astrologer, the Mountain Astrologer has to be something that has been like the cornerstone of what we do. So I think that it's very vital, and I think that your contribution has been great. Tell me about the Bound Report.
The Bound Report, yes, that's the newest thing. It's my
tell me about this.
So I was reading a recently published book that claimed that bound rulers don't matter in natal astrology, and that really got into me. I was like, no, man, the bound rulers tell you how something's going to manifest materially. This is literally how things show up. So I started a year ago a class. It was about all of like 2023 into 2024 called Leaps and Bounds, and we just tracked the sun through the bounds and any astrological sources about bounds. So I would just, go through the library and find any kind of academic or prior astrological source that discussed bound rulership and the different systems. There's more than 7 different divisions of bounds, and they work with primary directions. And so we just had like a very meandering exploration of all of the bounds. We would meet. We actually still are keeping going because they didn't want to stop. So every Saturday I meet with my class and we talk about what we're picking up about paying attention to how things appear based on the sun's journey through the bounds. One student decided to pick up the moon through the bounds, and I'm like, that's just way too hectic for me because she moves so fast. I was like, I have a lot going on. I don't think I can pay attention at that level, but it works actually. And so we were really tuning into like what the bound as an essential dignity has to say. And I was writing prompts for them all last year. And this year I was like, you know what, I think I can try to maybe challenge myself and bring my own creative writing into the mix by taking any overt reference to the astrology out of the bound report and turn it into a kind of prompt that would allow people to tune into the level of paying attention to how stuff shows up. And a lot of people in the astrological community, I imagine, are creative. I mean, maybe, and I'm saying that because most of the people I hang out with tend to be making something, whether it's books, jewelry, art, paintings, music, you name it. And so it's like, if you can track where the sun is going through the bounds of the tropical zodiac, then you get to sense this shift in how things actually feel or are. Like the transition between late Gemini into early Cancer, the bounds, according to the Egyptian bounds, go from Mars to Saturn to Mars, and it takes about 2 weeks. And last year, everybody in class had a crisis, a car accident, something crazy happening for that entire stretch of time. And I'm like, oh, people get all twisted about the Via Combusta, but this part of Gemini into Cancer is actually pretty gnarly, and like even though the Mercury might be still in Gemini and maybe there's something, Jupiter could be in a phenomenal place so that when the sun ingresses into Cancer, everything seems great because of the exaltation ruler. No, like the bounds there are really hairy. And if you think about it, Mars goes out of bounds during that part of its transition, not every single time, I believe, but like Mars will be out of bounds and it will be the term ruler. So it's like when Mars is out of bounds to the, in Cancer, that's like extra crazy, Yeah. So the bound report really is this free mini horoscope that is not going to read like a horoscope, but that will hopefully help people tune into working with how they can actually create something right now.
Yeah, I'm subscribed to it. I think it's great. I'm like, man, Jenn she's so ahead of time. Like, I just feel like you're pushing the needle, like, and then I love your mind. I love how you think and through your writing and that's one of the things that fascinates me about astrologers. We all can read the same book. We all can learn the same technique from Guido Bonatti or William Lilly or whoever, but the way that you intake it and then you begin to work with that and how you look at it through your perception and through your lens, it's going to be different from everybody. But I think that your perception, looking at things through your lens, through your writing and your courses and different things, I think phenomenal. Like one time I listened to a course you did about writing articles, and I heard you say one time that, you don't want to write the same thing that's already been written on the same subject. If you are going to do it, then at least do a different spin on it, but don't write the same thing that's already been written, So I think, like you said, as creatives, for you to create the bound report, I just think it's phenomenal for you to be able to take that and then now put it in the perspective that everybody can now read and begin to learn and really look at this whole thing. And we will get into the end of how everybody can go ahead and subscribe. I've subscribed to it. Everybody subscribed to it. And then there's also the membership. There's a membership. Explain what happens with the membership.
Oh, at the Kaylee membership?
No, with the bound report, if there's a paid subscription as well.
Oh yeah, that's simply just a tip jar, basically. There's nothing extra special about it. It's more like if you really enjoy it and you want to give back and circulate energy, then I'm happy to accept it. So
yeah.
But yeah,
So you have we're talking about the creatives. We're talking about the bound report. Now I think that this is really going to be big. I really think it's going to be big.
You do?
I really think so. I really like it. I think it's going to be big. I think that your concept, just how you think, the content that you're putting in there, and I really think that it's gonna do very well. So I'm really looking forward. I'm glad to be able to read it. I look forward to it. So I think that it's gonna be great. I want to now shift into, because we're talking about creative. Tell us, what is this thing, the Revelor Press? What is this?
Revelor. This is, so back to that conversation about publishing and making things legible. I'll tell you this. When I started college, because I could not go to Kepler College, my German teacher had designed the curriculum, but the college wasn't going to open until 2002, and I was already ready to go by 2000, So I was like, I can't go there, which broke my heart, by the way, because I never got to be a part of that Kepler class. And I went to Gallatin School of Individualized Study at New York University, and they had us sitting at the top floor of the Bopes Library, and they said they spent 2 hours buttering us up with lunch and all kinds of conversation about, you can study anything you want in our program. What do you want to study? And they started asking students, so I raised my hand, and they said, how about you? I said, astrology. They go, it's not academic enough. I'm like, you sat here for 2 hours telling us that we can do anything here, and the first thing out of my mouth, you say anything but that. So that kind of became my battle cry. And so Revelor is a longer answer to that question of like, so if it's not academic, if astrology is not academic enough because we don't have sources, then I'll make them with Revelor. So it's a press that is independent publisher. I founded it in 2014 under a different name, but then I changed the name to Revelor in 2017. I just had a dream and woke up and got the right name in place. And then I publish books it's really about liminal experience. It's not just about astrology, because I think there's more to what astrology actually allows us to do, is to examine the future and the past in new ways. And so as people who can read these symbols and see through time and interpret what's going to happen more or less, right, because it's not ever 100% accurate, we can do these liminal translations, but there's so much more to art and poetry than just astrology. And so Revelor takes that spirit and says, well, what about liminal poetry? What about looking at philosophical traditions like Jean Gebser that talks about the ever-present origin and this kind of, primordial leap kind of, thing in pop form. And so it's a way for me to be fully myself and not just express only the astrological side, but there's definitely a part of the mission of Revelor that wants to produce high-quality, academically legible, advanced astrology books that other publishers who we can all rattle off, they always publish intro books. Well, why? Because the market wants its return on its investment, so it's going to stick at the level of an introductory book, but the community doesn't want intro books anymore. We want to have meaty books, something really intense that is going to push us to the next level. So I end up looking for works like that. And so it's been, because it's almost 10 years old now, and I'm only just now getting to the point where I'm attracting the kind of authors and projects that are going to be representative of the kinds of works that I want Revelor to be known for.
Wow. And so if somebody, and I believe I agree with you, because we don't want cookbooks anymore. We want advanced. So yeah. I'm 100% with you. So if somebody wants to send a proposal to you, they would send a proposal to you. You would go over it and see if it's something that fits this particular publication. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so I think that's phenomenal, to be able to have, look how many things we've talked about already. You have so many things. That's why I said you are the master. You are the master astrologer. You are definitely pushing the needle, astrology. And then here we go again. Explain or let us know, how did you start Within Orb, your podcast?
Oh, my podcast was really it just happened actually kind of by itself. Maybe it's Venus, right? It just spontaneously came out. Its creator. So the podcast was a way of actually letting people know about the Celestial Arts Education Library without telling them about the Celestial Arts Education Library. I thought, we have all these books here, and I wanted to flip the script as a way of saying, hey, what astrology books do you love? And you're my next guest, by the way, so everybody listening, you're going to have to pull a reach around and come over to Within Orb and hear Issachar talk about his books, because that's what's coming. But I wanted to know how they got into astrology with books. Your first book is kind of like your first love, right? And it'll allow you to tell a story about where you came in, just like you started your podcast today asking me, where did you come in? And that is a super important thing to model for people wanting to come in to realize, hey, there's all these ways that people come to astrology, and also all these ways that I've seen through the books. So we're up to like 45 episodes now. Hearing people say things like, yeah, there was the column in my mom's magazine, but my first book was this, right? And then you get into this huge story about how that book got in their hands. And then I thought, I want to know about the most important books. And for some reason, the idea of a question around desert islands stuck, but then I got bored of desert islands. So I started mixing it up to like a remote place, So it's been like a cave, a Mariana Trench, wandering around the wilderness, and you name it. So people have been all over the place. But it's like, what are the books you would carry with you that mean so much to you? And I realized only until we did an April Fool's episode where I was the guest and my producer was the host. And I tried to answer the question myself, and I was like, oh, my God, this is a hard question. And I realized this is the true story of me teaching, is that I always make things more complicated. And I was like, this is like a hard question to answer unless, you're like super, you just have your like 3 loves, and these are the books that are going to do it for you. But if you love a lot of different books, it's hard to pick 3. And then the last question I always ask is about people, what they would recommend to beginners, because if you really loved what someone's talking about, you want to know where they would send you, and try to get a sense of like where to learn it from there. And then I thought, like, I'm kind of, sometimes a little bit bored with repetition, which is one reason why we've talked about so much different stuff, is because I love doing lots of different things and having different experiences. And I'm like, podcasting means you kind of have to have a little bit of a weekly regularity. And so I thought to myself, like, okay, in order to keep things interesting but also regular, I said, let's stick with those 3 questions, and the answers to them are what's different. And it's been so amazing to see the books that people bring up and the books that have never been brought up before, and when it suddenly erupts and like that's the book that they want to talk about, I'm just like, this is so cool. Like, our community is so cool. We have a lot of cool people who study astrology.
Oh, definitely. We got a lot of cool people. Last year, I had the opportunity to go into the Astrological Association conference in London, and I got to meet, the Deborah Holdens, the Lee Lehmans, and a lot of the great astrologers whose books and courses and lectures I had, studied for years. And it's very interesting when you get into that community where you're like, this is so cool, because all of us are studying and all of us are learning, and we all are coming from different perspectives, but we all can sit at the same table and have a great discussion. So I've always found that to be very fascinating. Jenn, when somebody comes to you and says, I want to schedule a consultation, what can they expect? What kind of astrologer are you? What do you offer your clients?
So the cheeky answer to that question is, I'm a bossy astrologer, because I tell people what to do. And then some people might be sitting on the edge of their seat and just fell over and like, we're like, what the did she just say? But the thing is, like, I mix some of the, I would say, like, I don't know, let's be bold here, like fatalism of tradition with also blowing people open to the possibilities of action, right? So it's like, I'm going to say some stuff because here's what your chart's saying. And I'm not speaking out of my intuition. I'm literally reading the data. But I loved it when I spoke with Barish Ilan from Turkey, because she's like, when you're living your chart, life gets easier, because it's not like you're resigning yourself to your fate. But if you experience tuning into the things that are in your chart and actually accepting them and living from that position forward, life does unfold easier. It's like working smart and not hard. And I think that's why people come to astrologers. So I'll tell people a range of options, but I'll do it in a bit of a, but I really think this would potentially be a cool thing to do given what I'm seeing here. And they'll end up trying it out or avoiding it and saying, oh, I wish I had done it, because they actually see like there's some truth in that. And it's not because I'm trying to be right, but I get excited about things that are really going to be good for this person, and I think they pick up on that excitement. And so most of the time when people walk away after an hour with me, the words I'm hearing are, I'm excited, I'm inspired, I feel like I've got a vision, I feel like I have options to do something about whatever it might be. And they end up happier because there's somehow this sense of possibility or kind of spark happening to them, So that's what people come back for, too, when they do come back. It's just like, I needed another injection of jet fuel. And I'm like, I got you. Let's do this,
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like to ask astrologers also, when it comes to like forecasting or prediction, what techniques do you use, or what techniques do you find to be very accurate?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think using perfections to rank transits is just a baseline, right? And then sometimes if I look at the zodiacal releasing from Spirit, I won't see much, and so I won't talk about it because it's not good to tell somebody, well, you don't have anything here, because, like, that's not empowering, right? You're like, oh, there's nothing for me there. Like, people who don't do astrology don't understand what that means, so you just end up not going there for that one. I'm just actually learning spherical trigonometry with my leaps and bounds folks to be able to have confidence working with primary directions. That's like a new advanced thing for me. So I've been looking at that a little bit lately, but that's not something that I do every time or even regularly. And so I would say I love mixing secondary progressions with some of the solar return techniques, and that's a bit the bread and butter, really, is like looking at secondaries. But I've also gotten into, if I were going to do a more extended work with an individual, I would add tertiary progressions to it as well, because they're very, they're new to me and they're fun, and I think that if I can get to a point where it's like second nature, I might add that to a normal consult. But if someone's asking me about the year ahead, then I'll start with perfections, add a bit of solar return, check out secondary progressions, and then make some statements.
That sounds pretty good. The great Jenn, so many facets to you, so many different things going on. How do you stay, I would say, focused, or how do you stay balanced with so many things going on? It seems like, I know you have to have like some kind of organizer or something like that, just with so many things going on, because everything we discussed is still not talking about the fact that you do have a personal practice as well. So you are seeing clients as well. So I'm just like, oh my God, like,
how does it all happen? And I'm
you're doing lectures. You're reading proposals for books.
ADHD. Step 1, have ADHD. Step 2, no, it took my time. So in Germany, when I was going to school there, I got to live in Germany in high school. I took a year off when secondary progressed Jupiter entered my ninth house. A secondary progressed moon was with that Jupiter. So I was off in Germany for a year. And what they do in their class schedule for high schoolers is they chunk out the days. So you'll only have your physics class on Wednesdays. You'll only have your chemistry class on Thursdays. So I only see clients one day a week. I only teach one day a week. I only publish my stuff one day a week. And then with the bound report, I have to have a separate awareness because the bounds will change very frequently. But, I've been doing this now for over 10 years, so it's kind of second nature. And I just have this sense of like, oh, today is the day that my brain does this. And then next day, today is the day my brain sees clients. Today is the day I have meetings and such. And today's the day I record with an orb and touch in about that and talk to my producer. So all of it's chunked out by day, and then that keeps regularity, even though every single day is different.
Where we are now in 2024, or going into 2025, because we're almost at the half mark of the year, is there anything specifically that has your attention, or something that you are concerned about? Any kind of transits, major transits, or anything like that you yourself have said, this is something that I got my eye on?
I think the thing I had my eye on just passed, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that was on April 20th. Mm-hmm. One thing personally happening is the Libra solar eclipse in October, just because of it hitting things in my chart specifically. But one thing I love looking at, which is not particular to me, is the way things like this recent Jupiter-Uranus conjunction affects people born with it in their chart in prior years, like 1983 or in the mid-50s. You have people who are going to be experiencing what Robert Blaschke called a holographic transit. So moving forward, looking ahead, Saturn conjunct Neptune at 0 Aries, to me, is going to be calling up all those people born in 1953 who have it in their chart in Libra, and all those people in the early 90s who have it in their chart in Capricorn. And I'm looking to see the face-off between these generations of people and what their Pluto placements will also do as they sort of struggle to cope with this holographic transit coming up.
How do you feel about Uranus going into Gemini?
I mean, there's the classic, if you pay attention to midnight astrology, you're like Chicken Little civil war throughout the country, and you can see percolations of that. Yeah. But, that'd be the easy answer. I think, in each subsequent conflict, they seemed to be less and less taking up on American soil. So, for example, the Revolutionary War, which is also a failed British Civil War, that was totalizing. And then you have our own Civil War, which took place around this, fault line in the center of the country. But the Second World War that, we have the Pearl Harbor attack, that was not necessarily open conflict inside our nation in the same way that the Civil War and the Revolutionary War were. So I don't know about this prediction of, intense domestic conflict and open violence as opposed to other forms of warfare that would still be domestic. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And what do you have going on right now? Like, where those who are listening, if you have any classes, any lectures, are you releasing anything new coming out that we can be looking out for, or anything new that you got coming out?
Do you have another hour?
Oh, my God.
So I'm currently working with Roseanne Finn on her book about Pluto out of bounds and the declination cycle and the rise and fall of world empire. I'm bringing Robert Blaschke's entire 5-volume set of Earthwalk astrology back into print, starting with progressions. I'll be teaching holographic transits later this fall through the Celestial Arts Education Library with the new edition of holographic transits. I'm working with Joy Usher on a book about Al-Biruni's Munakara aspect. So it's one tiny fragment of Al-Biruni that she completely explodes into an entire book. And that's Revelor Press material. I'm teaching advanced progressions for Kepler College, where we'll go over tertiary progressions and converse progressions, which is my personal favorite right now because I love the theoretical implications of what a converse progression on secondary, tertiary, you name it level means. And then publishing the Cayley Review for the Cayley Library and lots of other stuff besides, I'm sure.
Are you speaking at any conferences this year, like NORWAC or anything like that?
I'll be at NORWAC, so if you wanted to meet me, I'll have a table there, and you can come and see what Cayley's all about and get a Saturn stress ball. I made some stress balls. They have them in the shape of Saturn, so I was like, oh, this is irresistible because Saturn rules stress, right? So I'm just like, squeeze Saturn back. And we'll be at NORWAC meeting everybody and doing a fundraising drive for the library. And then what else? Nothing that I can think of for the rest of the year, but there's some private research seminars happening at Cayley that are going to be really exciting, and I'll be able to speak about them after they take place. So.
All right. So now tell us, how could we contact you? How could we get with Kelly? How could we get with Bound Report? You're within Orb. How can we contact you and get in contact with all these different things and sign up and be on the mailing list so that we know when new things are being released?
Awesome. So yeah, my name.com, so JENNZAHRT.com, JennZarht.com, boundreport.com, withinorb.com, revelor.com, and the Cayley Institute is CAELI.institute. So, but if you go to JennZarht.com, it's all there. You can link through to all that different stuff.
Oh, that's wonderful. Jenn, you are what I call, I said this, a master astrologer. And one of the reasons why I wanted to interview is because I wanted to give you your flowers. You know, throughout astrology, the going backs and forths, and when you're into what you love and what you do, a lot of times we don't have the opportunity to really give our astrologers their flowers, especially when you're inspired and when you see somebody who works hard as you do, and just so many different facets, the creativity that you have, the creator in you. I had to give you your flowers so that you know that you are doing a phenomenal job. You are definitely pushing the needle. When I look at what you've done now, I can only imagine what's coming, and so I'm excited because if we can see what's happening now, could you imagine what's coming in the future? So I just think that this is a phenomenal time for us to be in, with everything that you're doing, with all the people that you have connected with you, and I know that you have been a blessing in the astrological community that we're in, and you can see that by just everybody whose platform you're on, and so forth, with ISAR and OPA and NCGR and all these other organizations that we have. I think that you are definitely doing a great, phenomenal job. And we just want to let you know that we support you. So those of you who are listening, if you want to support her, go to the website. There's so many different ways that we can support her. Like I said, She has so many great things that she has going on. But the most important thing for me is, as an astrologer, I love her perception of how she deals with astrology, how she attacks it, and how she pretty much unfolds the things that she has. Like you said, she's in Bernadette Brady's class, and she's listening to what Bernadette is teaching, but it's coming to her at a different perspective. And then when she begins to teach it, it doesn't sound like anything else that everybody else does. I've heard a lot of people talk about triplicity rulers, but nobody's teaching it like you. So I just think that, I just think that it's phenomenal. And I just want to encourage you, because I don't know, what you go through behind the closed doors. I don't know the struggles. I don't know the ups and the downs that you go through. But I just want you to know that just keep going, because you are helping a lot of us as astrologers. And you are moving the needle. That's the most important thing, is that we continue to move the needle of astrology and let the world know that this is one of the greatest sciences that ever was created, and that this is not some hocus pocus thing that everybody's scared of. This is a science. This is something that's calculated, that's mathematics and everything is included. So I think that when you get to your level and really get to understand that, I just think that there's so many great things happening, and also to your family, everybody that's involved with you, because I believe that when you expand, everybody that's connected to you will expand as well. And so we just wanted to give you your flowers and let you know that we are over appreciative of your commitment and your contribution. And we just want to say thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the flowers. It feels good. I appreciate that. And I want to say just one last thing to inspire anyone listening who thinks, this is 25 years in the game. If you're not 25 years in yet, keep going, keep trying, keep doing what you love with astrology, because it will take time for something to erupt into visibility for others. You're not invisible for all time. You will become, you'll find your place in the community exactly where you need to be, but you have to just keep going. And what you see with me, and thank you for all of your support and praise, but it is the result of 25 years of work and 19 years of totally silent work. It's not something that happened overnight. It's very much worth saying that there's a lot of you out there doing great work, and just keep going. It'll ripen in its own time when it's right.
Oh, definitely. We want to thank Jenn for taking the time out of her busy schedule to be a part of this podcast. We want you to know, those of you that are listening, you can find out all her contact information. Everything is in the show notes. You'll be able to join and support her and be on her email list so that we can follow and definitely be able to check in with everything that's going on. And so we want to thank you so much for being on this podcast. And Jenn, we like to say this one thing. We love you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. It's always a joy.